And so I decided, you know what? If I read the book of Ephesians, it bleeds right from Ephesians chapter 5. And again, we know there's no chapter breaks or
Right.
verses in the original. It bleeds seamlessly from Paul, what we call chapter 5, which is about marriage, bleeds seamlessly right into getting dressed in the armor of God. So I think Paul could be as clear as possible. If you want to do Christian marriage, you better get dressed for spiritual battle because it's coming to your doorstep.
Welcome to Conversations with Tyndale House Scholars in America. Interviews that highlight the kingdom impact that scholars from Tyndale House bring to the United States. In this episode, Dr. Timothy Muehlhoff, professor of communication at Biola University, explores both spiritual battles in relationships and the Winsome Conviction Project, dedicated to deepening convictions without dividing communities. You can find more information about us as well as listen to all previous content by visiting our website at friendsoftyndalehouse.com. Let's join the conversation now and hear from a professor with a heart to speak the truth in love.
Hello, everyone. My name is George Davis, and I want to thank you for joining us for this conversation on behalf of Tyndale House in Cambridge, England. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Tim Muehlhoff from Biola University, and Tim is a professor of communication there. And Tim, thanks for giving us a few minutes of your time.
Oh, George, my pleasure. I had such a great time working over there at Tyndale House that my pleasure to be able to share some of the things that came from that great visit.
Well, speaking of Tyndale House, let's talk a little bit about the book that you were working on when you were at Tyndale House. It's a book on marriage, but it deals with a topic we don't normally associate with marriage. In fact, probably a topic that is often overlooked in marriage books. So tell us a little bit about that project.
Yeah, well, George, I did a really stupid thing. I was flying to Jerusalem and, wanted to grab a book or two to read. And
Right.
so I grabbed a book I had recently gotten on Paul's handling of spiritual battle. So I took it. It was written by a colleague of mine at Biola University. And this is a quote that ruined my life.
Okay.
So I thought I would ruin the lives of your listeners as well, kind of play tag, you're it. So, on the topic of spiritual battle, suggests New Testament scholar Clint Arnold, some of us suffer from a double mindedness. Although mental assent is given to the likelihood that evil spirits exist, since it's affirmed in the Bible, it really makes no practical difference in the way that we live our day to day lives. And over there on the way to Jerusalem, I just had that like epiphany. Uh, every year, George, I have to sign the doctrinal statement at Biola University. We affirm it every single year. And one of the points is we believe in a personal devil that is seeking to wreak havoc in the church. George, I have signed that for 19 years.
Okay.
But Clint Arnold said, okay, granted, does it make any difference in how you do your life? And to be honest, if you ask me the question, does believing in a personal devil make a difference in how I teach my classes? I'd probably say, no, not really. Does it make a difference in how I parent my kids, how I do marriage? The answer probably is no, not really. And that was the epiphany, is here is a spiritual reality, and 20% of everything Jesus had to say had to do with spiritual battle. It's mentioned by every New Testament writer. John goes so far as to say the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. So here I am, a Christian professor who speaks on marriage. My wife and I travel the country speaking at family life marriage conferences, and yet it doesn't make a difference in how I do my day to day life. I was thoroughly convicted. And so I decided, you know what? If I read the book of Ephesians, it bleeds right from Ephesians chapter 5. And again, we know there's no chapter breaks or
Right.
verses in the original. It bleeds seamlessly from Paul, what we call chapter 5, which is about marriage, bleeds seamlessly right into getting dressed in the armor of God. So I think Paul could be as clear as possible. If you want to do Christian marriage, you better get dressed for spiritual battle because it's coming to your doorstep.
So the book is really entitled Defending Your Marriage. And so it
Yeah.
deals with how we engage spiritual conflict in marriage. So maybe
right?
just, I mean, that's kind of the big picture. Give us maybe one piece of practical advice for those of us who are married to understand this topic in relationship to marriage.
Yeah, how about two quick nuggets that came from
Okay.
the book? And Clint Arnold, the very man who messed up my life by that quote, he actually wrote the foreword to the book. He's written 2 books on spiritual
Right.
battle. So one, Satan cannot read your mind, but there's ample evidence that demons can plant thoughts. So we get that from remember in First Chronicles, it says that Satan incited David to take a census of his troop strength. Now you might think that it's good for a leader to know troop strength, but we know from First Chronicles he had shifted his confidence from God to his army. We know that even Jesus himself, right, on the mountain, Satan gives him a panoramic view of all the earthly kingdoms and says, I can give you these kingdoms. Well, I actually stood on that mountaintop. You can't see much. So many people, including Clint Arnold, believe that Satan was able to paint a picture in Jesus's mind of all earthly kingdoms. So so that's why Paul says, take every thought captive. So the second nugget I'll give is we have to know what demonic influence looks like. And the ancient church would say, just assume you're under a spiritual attack. I mean, just assume it. The modern church is like, you have to prove it to me first, and then maybe I'll be open to it. Where the ancient church is like, do you want to have a Christian marriage? Do you want to raise Christian kids? Do you want to be a pastor? Do you want to be a good parishioner? You're under spiritual attack, because Satan is opposed to all those different things. So in the book, I have a chapter on diagnosing the demonic. Like, what are the top 5 signs that the demonic may be happening? And that's everything from uncontrolled anger, a lack of forgiving somebody, violent dreams made the list. I read 15 books on spiritual battle from trustworthy experts and asked the question, were there signs of the demonic that all these books mentioned? And so all of them mentioned anger, lack of forgiveness, violent dreams, not believing the best about God anymore, not believing the best about yourself. I mean, all of us can improve in different areas. So I can improve as a husband, a professor. But if I ever start getting the idea that I'm the worst husband, I'm the worst professor, then we probably have crossed over that this is demonic influence, and it's time to start praying warfare prayers. So I say at marriage conferences, listen, if you're a Christian couple who's serious about your faith and you're having conflict, I would first pray a warfare prayer and then get on resolving conflict using proven techniques of how to resolve conflict. But you're probably under spiritual attack where a demon is trying to get a foothold in your anger, your disappointment, your bitterness. And that's where we pray this warfare prayer, and then we get on with church unity.
So we just need to keep in mind that this could be a dimension of what we are dealing with in our marriages, a dimension that we often overlook.
Yeah, and I think George, honestly, Paul would say, hey, listen, are you serious about church unity? Are you serious about loving your wife as Christ loves the church? Wives, are you serious about respecting your husband as you do the Savior himself? You're under a spiritual attack.
Right.
And I more am like, oh, I don't know, maybe. And I think that moves away from the New Testament a little bit. Now, this is the response I get, George, all the time when I speak to pastors here in the US. They say, but listen, we don't want to overdo this, right? We don't want to get carried away. And my honest response is, look, in the West, I think we are so far removed from getting carried away that I think we're okay. Because I spoke at a pastor's conference and said, in the last year, how many of you have preached on spiritual battle? In the last year, there's about 100 pastors. George, do you know what the average answer was?
It wasn't a strong response. I'm confident of that.
0.
Yep.
0. And so I said, why? And the 2 biggest answers from pastors were, one, I've seen it done badly. I saw it done poorly. And then second, if I open that door, I don't know quite how to close the door. And again, C.S. Lewis was brilliant on this, right? We can give too much attention to Satan.
Right.
We can give not enough. And we do want to find that balance. But I think the Western church, for a lot of reasons, is very hesitant to go in the spiritual battle direction. And I think that just gives Satan free reign in our churches and in our marriages, and with our kids.
Right. Well, this work on marriage is really part of a bigger project that you're engaged in, which is the Winsome Conviction Project at Biola. Tell us a little bit more about that project.
Well, it really does bleed. They bleed both into each other. So about 4 years ago, some donors were very concerned with how Christians are treating each other. It
Right.
was the 2016 presidential election in the US. One study said that almost a third of family members who responded to the survey had stopped talking to a family member based on the presidential election. So we were created. How do you help Christians talk about things that are really pushing us towards disunity? So it was for sure the presidential election 2016. COVID came along, and churches and Christian universities and Christian organizations disagreed on how to respond to it, like mask mandates and whether we
Right.
should meet publicly. Add race to the mix, right? Critical race theory has become this almost iconic dividing issue where people are like just mention critical race theory, and you get two well-established camps immediately formed. So we come in and apply scripture with communication theory, and we try to help people. How do you package and have a productive conversation? Like, what are the steps you need to do beforehand? How do you actually organize the conversation? And then what do you do after the conversation is over, as not to undo all the hard work you just did in that middle conversation where you sat down at a congregational meeting or Starbucks with a person in a church small group. So George, it's a complex issue. Like, people want to make, like, hey, give me 5 techniques. And it's like, I don't think that works on some of these issues, because these are deep divides that we've seen within the church. So we really need to do the hard work before, during, and after a conversation. And let me just encourage people to go to the winsomeconviction.com website, and all of our material is for free. We give a 7-day devotional that we think people should do ahead of time to check their hearts, check their biases, check their attitudes as you head into the conversation. Because if you don't do that, it's going to sabotage the whole conversation once you eventually have it.
Yeah, I've checked out the website. You've got some great resources, not only in terms of printed resources, but also in terms of an ongoing podcast that really help us think through how do we engage others well.
Yes.
And that really leads to your next book. Speaking of elections, next year is an election year, and you're co-authoring a book with Sean McDowell. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Sean is one of these amazing people that practices what he preaches. He has almost 200,000 YouTube followers.
Okay.
And George, it's amazing who he brings on his podcast. The atheists, people of different faith traditions, people who have walked away from Christianity, people who attack Christianity. And he really does an amazing job holding to biblical truth, but speaking truth in love. And so when I'm been a long admirer, so I asked him to work on this book. Let's come together, an apologist and a communication professor. So the book is called End the Stalemate, Moving from Cancel Culture to Meaningful Conversations. Tyndale is the publisher, and it's going to come out mid-June, just in time for the presidential election, just in time for us to do round 2 in the United States. And I don't think we've learned a whole lot. So End the Stalemate is our deep dive into what the book of Proverbs says. A word spoken in the right circumstance is like fine jewelry. So what does it take to create that fine circumstance? And it's going to be a little hard, George, because I can give you the communication tools, but then you have to apply it to specific people, right? To your spouse, your child, your church member. And that's going to change a little bit how you use the tools, but we basically give readers tools. And then let me tell you the really cool part about the book, George, is we're creating an interactive website that you can go to and practice in a safe environment. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
really?
Yeah, so you can go, and we're going to start with the presidential election, and
Okay.
you'll go to the website, you'll listen to a moderate, you'll listen to somebody representing progressive politics, and then somebody representing conservative. And maybe as you listen to one side or the other, you just want to scream at the computer. Well, this is the place to scream, because you're alone with a website, and you can have a bad day trying to apply the principles. Because George, you can't have a bad day when you're actually having a conversation, because those words, once they're uttered, that goes into the history of the relationship. So this is a place that you can just go and practice what we're talking about and have a good day, bad day, use these. So it's going to be endthestalemate.com.
Okay.
And it'll all be up and running by June 18th this summer.
Well, I look forward to that, and I can see a lot of practical application. But let's just think a little bit more about in the meantime. I mean, it's not out yet, and even before we get to the election next year, we've got the Christmas season. And I think the reality is, for many of us during the Christmas season, we're going to spend time with friends and family. We have more conversation. And if we're honest, in some of those relationships, we've already had awkward conversations. There are people in our family, in our sphere of influence, that look at the very issues you mentioned earlier very differently, from politics to COVID medication to cultural issues. And we've already had some of those awkward conversations.
Yeah.
So now, as we move toward Christmas, how can we navigate those conversations and those situations better? I know you can't give us the whole book, but could you just give us a little bit of insight that could help make that a little bit better this time?
So George, honestly, I would cancel Christmas dinner until June. I wouldn't.
Well, okay.
Cancel Christmas, cancel any. No, I'm kidding. But you said it so well, George. It's that relational history with that person.
Right.
Right. So we break down every one conversation into 3 conversations. You have the actual conversation, which is going to be Christmas dinner, or it's going to be people coming over for a Christmas party. That's the actual conversation. So an uncle brings up a political candidate, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm actually in the middle conversation, the actual conversation. We have made the argument, and this will be the point I'll give to your listeners. All the work happens before that day comes. This is what we call the pre-conversation. And there's a behavioral scientist named Daniel Goleman who has identified something called emotional contagion, which means all the negative emotions you have, like, you like these relatives, but you really don't like this relative.
Okay.
Daniel Goleman says that relative already picks up on it through the low road of the brain. Now, the way we could say this in popular vernacular, I get a good vibe from you, I get a bad vibe from you. So that person walking in already gets a negative vibe from you unless we deal with those emotions in the pre-conversation. So in that pre-conversation, that's where we have the 7-day devotional that you can go to our website. But some kind of spiritual preparation has to happen, because we've all had conversations that we really wish, like, I just wish I could rewind, because that was so bad what just happened. So I would say all the work has to go in yourself before those relatives ever walk through the door, so that you have a spiritual reservoir that you can draw from. Remember what the book of Proverbs says? A wise man overlooks an insult. So maybe over Christmas dinner, if somebody says something that you perceive as a jab or an insult, I have to be able to spiritually breathe. I have to commit that to God, and I have to be able to de-escalate myself, right? And all of that happens before the day, and we have a bunch of spiritual exercises that I need to go through. So George, here's what's so funny. As I'm writing this book, I have a friend of mine. We just don't see eye to eye on politics. We just don't. And we usually are really good at avoiding it. But this time he brought up a survey and made a comment that I really disagreed about the survey. So we got into it without any preparation on my part. We just got into it. And it's going bad when your wife comes outside and goes, right? You just know it's not going well.
I got you.
But that was because it came up out of the blue. I wasn't anticipating him. We kind of violated a rule that we're not going to talk about politics. And I decided to jump in it with no preparation whatsoever. So I would say with the good thing about the Christmas season, George, you see it coming.
Right.
Like, so I can already begin to spiritually prepare to overlook an insult, to give what does Peter say? I want you to give a blessing for a curse, Peter says. So that all has to be done beforehand. And then I would add one thing. Maybe Christmas is not the time to have the conversation, right? So maybe later we can talk about politics or whatever as a family, but maybe we just kind of set a rule. Hey, this Christmas, let's just enjoy, let's just watch some sports programs or something, but we're not going to let's just stay away from political topics. Now, if a family member violates that and brings it up, that's on me. It takes two to have a conversation. So I'm just not going to bite on the conversation, but that's going to require me praying through that moment of saying, Tim, this is not the time, it's not the place to try to have this kind of a complex discussion. So I'm going to let it pass. And that's where Proverbs says a wise man overlooks an insult. And I'm just gonna allow the conversation to go past and not bite on it.
So in other words, often these conversations, they go sideways because we really haven't done the prep work beforehand, even if we knew this is probably going to come up. So that's what we think about before we have those family dinners.
Yeah, so John Gottman, one of the top relational experts in the world, says the first 30 seconds sets the tone for the entire conversation. Right. So I need to know what my first 30 seconds is going to sound like no matter what. So let's say an uncle brings up or whatever, politics. I already know what my 30 seconds is. Hey, listen, today's kind of a crazy day. I know I'm a little bit stressed. There's so many things going on. I love that question. I just wonder if now's the best time to do this. Hey, I'd love to. Let's set up a Zoom meeting and let's do this a week from now. I would love to do it. But right now, I just don't feel like I'm in the headspace to do that. That's my 30 seconds.
Right.
See what I mean? And let's think about that. Yeah.
Oh, that's really helpful. Well, let's kind of come full circle. We started a few moments ago by talking about the work and book you did at Tyndale House. Just give us a little more background in terms of what that experience was like for you to research and write at Tyndale House.
Well, we get sabbaticals every 7 years at Biola. And so mine perfectly coincided. And so I decided to take part of that sabbatical and just go for the summer. And to me, George, it was the perfect mix. And my wife went with me, which was wonderful. We'd go for long walks. And I loved the fact that we had tea twice a day. I love those times to just intermingle with people. And to me, as we asked each other, what are you working on? To me, they would ask certain questions that I'd be like, oh, that's a great question. And I'd run back to my carrel, write that down and start to study a little bit of their question. But I found that the community was really revitalizing, and it honestly was one of the most productive summers. And again, it's a popular book on marriage and spiritual battle, defending your marriage. But my thoughts kept going in all these really productive directions. And we know from spiritual battle, you're never supposed to do this alone. The greatest defense we have is community. So working on this book with people back home checking in, but also having my Tyndale community, man, to me, it was just a perfect combination of fun, sustained thought. And then my wife and I would just go for long walks where I could process and think and have fun. So what a gift, George, to people of just to get away and be in an environment where I can think in community. I think that's really important.
No, that's a great observation. Well, Tim, I want to thank you for your work. I enjoyed even checking out some of the resources at the Winsome Conviction website. And in fact, I think there's one of those podcasts I'm going to ask my family to listen to before we gather for for Christmas. So I want to thank you for helping make our Christmas break together a little more meaningful.
Yeah.
And I also just want to thank those of you who support Tyndale House for your gracious support, your contributions, because it's your involvement that helps make this kind of work possible. So Tim, thank you very much.
Thanks, George.
My name's Peter Williams, Principal of Tyndale House in Cambridge. Thank you very much for watching this video of conversations with Tyndale House scholars in America. And thank you also for sharing this, because sharing a video like this helps spread the impact. Tyndale House exists to raise up Bible scholars who are servant-hearted and who are looking to help the church globally. So if you can like this or share it with others, that would be very helpful. Thank you also for your support of Tyndale House, and do visit the website friendsoftyndalehouse.com.